Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Rob's video blog. All right, today we're going to talk about coronavirus, or COVID, or the Wuhan virus, or the China virus, or whatever the hell you want to call it. The coronavirus that came from a lab in China. And if you don't believe me, I will put a link below to a number of sources that pretty much prove that it came from a level 4 bioweapons lab in China. Which just so happened to be right next to the Wuhan market in which it was first discovered. So, what was more likely, that this crazy, wacky virus just made itself in nature and it just so happened to present right outside a level 4 bioweapons facility, or that they were screwing around making all sorts of crazy viruses and stuff like that in the lab and it got out? Whether it got out intentionally or accidental, who the hell knows? We'll never know that. But it's pretty much 100% that this is a man-made virus. And like I said, I'll put a link below to a PhD who describes and who's tracked the progress of the coronavirus in the laboratory and how they started experimenting decades ago with different types of coronaviruses and how they branched two of them off. One was a research grade, one was a bioweapons grade. And anyway, he can explain it a lot better than I can. Anyway, coronavirus. It's November now, and back in like January, because I'm so plugged into the right individuals on social media, you were starting to see, and I was getting all these reports that the coronavirus is going crazy in China and in Wuhan, so bad that they were building like field hospitals and welding people into their buildings, welding the doors shut on people's apartment complexes in China to keep them from going out into public and potentially, I guess, spreading the virus. And this was before like any of this stuff was really making sort of mainstream news. And I remember telling my wife, I remember sitting at a bar for one of my friends' birthdays and telling them, you should probably go stock up on some food, because if this thing makes it stateside, it's going to be a disaster initially, and there might be food shortages and so on and so forth. And guess what? I was right. And so all the indications coming out of China, and it's tough to trust the information that comes out of China, was that this thing was pretty bad. It's pretty crazy. So actually, like even a week before businesses around here were shutting down and telling people to work remotely, I told my boss, I said, you know what? I don't really feel comfortable. I see what's going on over there. I think this is going to be. I think this is going to be bad. I think I'm going to work this week from home, and then the following Monday they sent out a letter to everyone telling them to stay home and work remotely. So Robbie D ahead of the curve as usual. But I remember talking to my wife and saying, even then, like, well, it seems like if you're a healthy person, it's not that big of a deal. You're going to get pretty bad. You could potentially get some pretty bad cough, flu-like symptoms, even for weeks on end. But you're going to be okay. It seems like older people with comorbidities, are the ones that are significantly at risk. And even at that time, fortunately, it appeared that the children in China and across the world were almost completely unaffected by it, and that's been proven to be true even today. So I remember telling my wife, it's not so much the virus that I'm concerned about. And I've got older parents. I have a father who got pneumonia in his lungs every, I want to say 2 out of the past 3 years. So when this was going on, he wanted to go to the gym and all this stuff. And I was like, you guys cannot go anywhere. You cannot go anywhere right now. This thing is running rampant. You guys are kind of vulnerable. You really have to be careful of what you're doing. You can't go to the gym. You can't do all this kind of stuff. So I was ahead of the curve. I was on board with that. And the big thing that I told my wife that I said that I was most concerned about was not the coronavirus, was that this thing is going to clog up the healthcare system so bad and the hospital so bad that you're going to have all these other incidental deaths of people not getting the treatment that they need. People having heart attacks, people who need surgery, all this kind of stuff. And if you go back through the statistics and look at it, they said in New York City, I forget what it's called, the excess death rate or something like that. But they said the number of people who've died from all these other ailments, whether it's heart attack or whether it's heart disease or cancer or some of this other stuff. They said it was a huge spike. It was like 2 times what it normally was for the months of like January, February, March, and April when people were locked down. They were too scared to go to the hospital, and the hospitals were all clogged up. And so I told my wife, I said, that's the biggest concern. So when they first implemented the lockdowns, and the thought process was, listen, we got to flatten the curve. We cannot let it overwhelm the hospitals. I was on board, made 100% sense. We didn't know everything that we know about the virus, that we then learned, after 2 months of having it in our population. We didn't really know how well. We didn't really know the best way to treat it. In fact, they were putting people, they were putting people on ventilators, which a number of doctors came out and said, guys, ventilators is for people whose lungs aren't working and they need their lungs to breathe from them. These people's lungs are moving. It's moving the air. The problem is their lungs are not absorbing the oxygen. It's almost like they have a blood disease, like altitude syndrome. And so putting people on ventilators was actually the wrong thing to do, despite the fact that our president continually touts how well we cranked out ventilators, and I don't doubt that we did. But the initial thought of putting people on ventilators, and that was the key. 2 months later, the doctors were saying ventilators really didn't do anything. They potentially even made things worse. So anyway, so we locked down initially to flatten the curve to not overwhelm the healthcare system. And I said to my wife, I said, this is going to be the excuse that all these state governments use to just lock people in their homes, to destroy businesses, to reshape society in whatever utopian form that they see. And that might seem crazy, but bear with me. Right? So the summer starts to roll around, and you weren't allowed to go outside. You weren't allowed to go to the parks. They painted arrows on the parks. You had to walk in one direction. You couldn't walk past people outside. This is complete insanity, ladies and gentlemen. This is complete fucking insanity, okay? You are not going to get infected by the coronavirus by walking in the opposite direction of somebody else and at that moment breathing in some air that happened to be around somebody else. Now, if you're walking by somebody else and they sneeze in your face, that's a different story, okay? But how many times in your entire life, let alone now, have you walked by somebody outside and they sneezed directly in your face? It like never happens. And so these guys were nuts. They were shutting down parks. They were shutting down outdoor activities and stuff like that. And again, to the president's credit, he said, hey, when the summer rolls around, this thing's probably going to start to go away. And people laughed at him, which I thought was weird. I mean, it doesn't. Of course it's going to go away in the summer. It may come back in the fall, which would make sense, but the flu does it every year, right? The flu season goes through, people get colds, they get pneumonias, and then the summer rolls around, people go outside. The light is a phenomenal disinfectant. UV radiation is so strong that it can give you skin cancer, but it also scrambles the DNA of bacteria and viruses. So as May and June rolled around, you started to see the virus come down, and it was the natural course of the virus, right? You're going to get this huge spike of everybody getting infected, and then it's going to start to come down. And so as things settled out over the summer, they finally opened up dining. You could dine outdoors, and then they said, oh, you can dine indoors, 25% of people, and so on and so forth, and all this kind of stuff. But in the process, they destroyed so many businesses, it's unreal, with their arbitrary, capricious rules. Somehow liquor stores and convenience stores were allowed to be open. You could wear a mask and you could socially distance getting booze, but you couldn't wear a mask and socially distance going to church, going to a retail store, going anywhere else. And apparently alcohol and cigarettes are essential. But all the other services and goods that you purchase are not. Apparently Home Depot is unique, that Home Depot is allowed to be open. Somehow you can go and buy shrubs and plants and all the other horse shit that Home Depot sells, and you can socially distance and wear a mask, and that's okay. But the local hardware store down the street, he can't do it. The local guy down the street that sells shoes couldn't do it. Who sells the tailor couldn't be open. The laundromat couldn't be open. None of this shit could be open. Destroyed people's livelihoods. And that was just in the spring. And I told my wife, I said, just wait till the fall. I said, everyone thinks like, maybe next year things. I said, look, it's going to come and go with the seasons. When the fall rolls around, it's going to ramp back up again. And what are we going to do? And they shut down the schools in the spring too, right? All the kids went to remote learning, which essentially meant nobody learned anything unless you were a high-functioning high school student or middle school student who was good at a computer and can learn independently. which there's a good portion of the kids that were older, 12, 13, 14, high school kids that usually do well. They were able to do that for a reasonable period of time. My brother's a high school teacher, and he said, hey, my AP classes, my honors classes, even my regular classes, most of the kids were able to get the work done and do an okay job for the couple of months that they were closed. But fall rolled around, and very few schools are open. They're doing some kind of a hybrid learning thing now. And now the local school district over here, because they got like 30 cases or something like that, is shutting down, and all these other schools are shutting down. And it's like, guys, kids are not at risk. Okay? The thing that drives me nuts about this whole thing is this is the ultimate experiment or this is the ultimate opportunity for people to make their own choices and manage their own risk, right? If you're scared of the coronavirus and you don't want to get it, or you don't want to risk giving it to a loved one or something like that, which makes perfect sense. Look, if you're not healthy, right, and you're in a high risk category, if you're old or something like that, or you're just not healthy and you're in a high risk category, I get it. I wouldn't go to sit inside an Uber or do something like that. That's stupid, right? You take reasonable precautions if you're at risk. But this is the ultimate opportunity for people to manage their own risk, because if you're scared of the coronavirus or don't want to get it, don't want to spread it, you don't have to go out. You can get your groceries delivered. You can order shit from Amazon. You can learn remotely or work remotely. You don't have to go out. So you have that option. But the fact that the governor of this state and the governors of a whole bunch of other states are destroying the livelihoods, imposing restrictions on everybody else. Can't open your business, you can't go to school, you can't do this kind of stuff. It's got all these awful, way worse than the coronavirus death implications. Way worse. The side effects, they said the mental and psychological side effects on children and people of being locked down and not seeing their friends and families and not going into work and not going to school, they said it is way worse. It is orders of magnitudes worse than the actual coronavirus. So it's just complete insanity. But like I said, if you wanted to stay home and you wanted to protect yourself and protect your loved ones, it's your choice. You can do that. You don't have to impose that on everybody else. The whole point of the mandatory lockdowns was that there was collateral damage, right? If people were going to be irresponsible and go out and get infected, then they were going to end up in hospitals, and then other people who potentially acted responsibly weren't going to have access to the healthcare system in the hospitals. Well, that ship sailed back in like April. Okay? Not only did that ship sail back in April, it never actually friggin' happened, especially in the New York metro area, because there was a frickin' Navy ship that pulled into New York Harbor. The Izod Center in New Jersey was all set up. Central Park had all these temporary hospitals, and nobody ever went to them. Nobody was ever sent to them. I think they said that Navy ship that was able to hold like 1,100 people at one time had a total of like 100 patients go there. 100. I'm not talking at once, like 100 total for the couple weeks that it was actually there. They never used it. The hospitals in Central Park, they never used it. The temporary hospitals that they set up in the Izod Center as an emergency, they never used it, which is good. You don't want to have to use that sort of thing. But this whole idea that the healthcare system was going to be so overwhelmed and blah, blah, it never happened. Or it came close to happening. It never happened. It's certainly not the situation now that we need mandatory lockdowns. They said the ICU beds and the hospital beds are like at normal capacity, maybe like 1 or 2% higher. It's nothing. There's no reason to be locking everybody down. But that's what happens. The government, man, they just whenever there's a crisis or a perceived crisis, the government will take all the power that they could possibly take to themselves and just exert it for the sake of exerting it. And don't tell me that any of this shit is based on science, because it's not. It's not. None of it's based on science. Mask wearing kind of works, but it kind of doesn't work. Basically, what mask wearing does is it prevents you from directly breathing or sneezing on someone. That's it. When you're breathing, where do you think the air goes? Oh, it's just going to go around the mask. These are not airtight masks that are filtering. All they're doing is just blowing the air out the bottom and out the top. So all it's really doing is preventing you from projectiling onto somebody else. If you're sitting in a car or in a closed space, something like that with somebody, the mask's not going to do shit. It's only going to keep you from sneezing on somebody, okay? And maybe that's good enough reason to wear the mask. That's fine. But people are like obsessed about masks. Put your mask on. You're standing outside. You're 5 feet away from me. Put your mask on. It's like, guy, chill out. Chill out, all right? Also, asymptomatic spread. Horseshit. Complete horseshit. If you go on the CDC website, it says that there's essentially very few, if any. And I think months ago they said straight out there have been no documented cases of asymptomatic spread. It would be the first virus in the history of the planet that you could spread asymptomatically, like through the air. It would be. It just doesn't make sense. The viral load's not there. You're not sneezing. How is it going to get out of your body? Is there select cases where maybe somebody did once when they were in close contact with a loved one in a car or something like that? All right, maybe, but like that's not the primary way this thing is spreading. It's not spreading asymptomatically. So if you don't have symptoms, if you don't have a positive test, like just chill out. You're going to be fine. The people around you are going to be fine. And listen, I've had friends and family who've gotten very sick with it, who were older, who got very sick. We had a friend of the family that was in the hospital twice for it. So I'm not downplaying that, for some people it is very serious. But the point that I'm making is for those people, they can take the proper precautions and not destroy the lives of everybody else. And if you don't have kids that go to school or you haven't missed a paycheck because of these lockdowns, it's real easy to sit there when your life isn't that much affected. I was very lucky. My kids were young enough that they're not totally in school. They go to like preschool or nursery school, which is, which fortunately is still open for the time being. So they're able to do that. And I was able to work remotely. I work remotely now 3 days a week. I go in 2 days by option just because I'm going to lose my mind if I'm at home that long. So I've been very lucky. So it's easy for me to sit here and go, oh yeah, lock everything down. Lock everything down. My livelihood's not on the line. My kids aren't driving me freaking nuts at home because they're not going to school. It's creating all sorts of problems. But the damage is done. The damage is done. I mean, I've talked. My wife was talking to the woman who runs the nail salon in town. The damage is completely done. She said people are terrified, and I said this to my wife in the spring too. I said to her, even if they pull the lockdowns off, I said these businesses and people's lives are going to be destroyed anyway because the media and the government has scared the shit out of people unnecessarily. They've scared people shitless. I mean, they've done polls of people, and I don't really trust many polls. I will say, if you want a good polling firm, the People's Pundit does phenomenal polling. Very, very good polling. They got the presidential race right last time. I mean, we'll see what happens with this presidential race, but basically the way the vote totals came in and how close the race was in a bunch of these states, they got it spot on. All the other mainstream media organizations weren't even close. But anyway, they've asked people like, hey, how scared are you that your kid's going to get the virus? And like 50 or 60% of people who had kids like under the age of 16 said they were like very, very concerned that their kid was going to get coronavirus. It's like the odds of your child getting coronavirus and getting ill with it is like next to zero. They have a better chance of like falling down a set of stairs and snapping their neck than they do getting coronavirus and getting very sick. And so the media has just terrified people, and people are not very good at assessing risks. What's the most dangerous thing that you do every day? What I'm doing right now is driving in a car, probably even more dangerous because I'm doing a video blog at the same time, right? So maybe I'll keep my eyes on the road a little bit more rather than looking at the camera, right? But this is the most dangerous thing that you do every day. The coronavirus for 99.9% of people is not the most dangerous thing that they're going to do. It's not the thing that's going to destroy their lives. But like I said, the media and the government have just terrified the population, and people just need to relax. I mean, and I guess it's just, and I told my wife, I said, I really feel like there's just two types of personalities. There are people who would rather be scared or they would trade their freedom they would trade their freedom for safety. And there are other people who say, you know what, my life isn't worth fucking living if I am so unbelievably restricted. I can't do the things that I want to do, that I would rather take the risk of dying and have the freedom to live my life the way that I want to live it. And to the first group of people, that seems completely foreign. And to people like myself who fall into the second group of people, the first group of people seems completely foreign, right? And I guess that's where like a lot of basic political tension comes from, right? You've got sort of two completely different mindsets as to how things should go. But like I said before, the thing that drives me nuts is like, this is one scenario where you don't have to force people to do things. If you are in the if you're in the first category and you're scared and you're concerned, which is okay, there's nothing wrong with that. Especially if you have good reason. If my brother has a friend who lives with his mother who's elderly. Like, he's got to be very careful because he could give it to his mother and kill her. And God, I couldn't imagine living with myself if that had happened. I get it. I get some people being very, very concerned and sensitive about it. It makes perfect sense. Um, but yeah, like I said, just the two mentalities. But this, like I said, this is the one scenario where people don't have to. You don't have to force people to do it. People can manage their own risk, and it would make everyone better. All you see is like people yelling at other people to wear masks, other people yelling that they don't want to wear a mask. It's like if you didn't have the mandate, people wouldn't have to yell at people to wear masks, right? If you didn't terrify everybody, they wouldn't have to wear a mask. Or like I said, like if you're just that concerned, just stay at home. You don't have to go out, right? So in regards to the science too, the best thing that they could have done, which would make perfect sense, and I said this back in the beginning, right, was what's the end game, guys? And like everyone was concerned, my wife was concerned, people were concerned. I said, guys, keep in mind, what is the end game? The end game for any virus is herd immunity. Whether you get that herd immunity through vaccine or you get it through people naturally getting it, that's the end game, is everybody gets it. And we build up immunity and enough people have it that the spread either gets, there is no spread or the spread becomes so minuscule that you don't have to worry about it anymore, right? Herd immunity, that's the way it's going to work, period. There's nothing else. You can't quarantine out of a viral outbreak. I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, you just cannot do it. And so I kept saying that, kept saying that, kept saying that. And then I started seeing things on Twitter that people said, like, herd immunity is crazy mentality. We shouldn't be pursuing a herd immunity end game. And it's like, that is the only end game. And supposedly they have some vaccines now. I certainly aren't taking it. The existing vaccines that we have now are questionable in their safety. So I'm certainly not taking a coronavirus vaccine. And they polled like half the population, and they said like at least half the people are not taking it. But mark my words, there will be mandates, and it won't be the government is telling everyone they have to do this. They're going to do it just like they do with the other vaccines, which drives me freaking nuts. They're going to go, your kid can't go to school unless they have a coronavirus vaccine. Well, Ticketmaster is trying to say now, oh, you can't come to the concert unless you have a negative test or you have proof of coronavirus vaccine. Well, somebody should litigate that because I believe that's violating. I'm not a lawyer, but I think that's violating discrimination based on like disability or a health condition or something like that. So I don't think they're allowed to do that. But they'll do that. Don't worry. When the vaccine comes out, they'll put restrictions on all the people that don't want to get the vaccine, despite the fact that they're potentially not at risk for the coronavirus, and it'll be a shit show. So, unfortunately, this was not a very upbeat and good one. But I'll put the link down below to show you that unequivocally that this virus came from a lab. So you can look. Excuse me. You can look into that. But all this, we're going to follow the science stuff. It's complete bullshit. 3/4 of what they did was completely arbitrary. It had nothing to do with science, and people just totally and completely overreact. Like I said, be reasonable about it. Assess your risk appropriately. Am I at risk? And what I am doing putting me at risk, putting other people at risk? Is that a risk that I want to take? Is it a risk I don't want to take? Right? And listen, like I said, I respect people's decisions to. While I might disagree with their risk tolerance, I respect people's decisions to do that. But like me and my family, we're going to have Thanksgiving. We're not having a virtual Thanksgiving. We're going to have a Thanksgiving. And guess what? If there was somebody in my family that had a cold or was coughing, they wouldn't come to Thanksgiving because that would be irresponsible. But if everybody's healthy, nobody's been sick, nobody's been in closed quarters with somebody that they know has been sick, there's no reason why we shouldn't get together and have Thanksgiving. If you can't get together with friends and family in a reasonable manner to celebrate family, to celebrate love, to celebrate Thanksgiving, to celebrate all the things that life is worthwhile, what the fuck is it? Why would you even bother living? What's the point of fucking living if you can't do any of that stuff? So the madness from the CDC telling people and some of the governors from these states telling people they have to wear masks in their house, which I believe is a Pennsylvania law now. I don't know how they're going to enforce that, but it's a Pennsylvania law now. It's complete madness. It's anti-human. It's horrible, and I would strongly encourage you to ignore it. So that's it for today. Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you again next time.